So, hi everybody, thank you for coming to this talk at KansasFest 2023. I'm here to talk to you about my life as an Apple II nomad and its intersection with the Apple II community. I am an Apple II nomad. So the actual title is a digital nomad, and I want to make sure we all start on the same page by answering the question, what is a digital nomad? So there are a lot of different definitions out there. It might vary based on who you ask. My definition is a digital nomad is somebody who has a job that is independent of a physical geographic location, so they don't need to be in a particular spot to do their job, and they use that freedom to travel more than half the year. So some people, for example, they do have a home that they live in 6 months a year, and then they get in an RV and they travel the other 6 months. I'll show you how it is that I do my traveling. But first I want to talk about how did I become a nomad? I've been coming to KansasFest for 26 years. Those of you who have known me for a while, this may feel like a relatively recent change in my lifestyle, and it kind of is. And it's largely based on my career. So my career was, I was an editor at Computer World magazine. They've been around since the 1960s. It's published by the same company that does Macworld, PC World, GamePro, Insider, A+. So I was in their office for almost 6 years as an editor, and in central Massachusetts. And then after that, I spent 5 years at various hospitals in the Boston area, not as a patient, but on the marketing team. I was running their websites, their Twitter account, writing some feature stories, and the like. And a lot of that, so I went from writing about technology to actually implementing technology and actually launching websites for some of these hospitals. But none of the companies I worked for used content management systems that I enjoyed. Drupal, Sitecore, TeamSite, Joomla. I was using all these things, never really enjoyed them. Whereas the software I was using on my own time for all my Apple II websites, like OpenApple and Juiced.GS and KansasFest, were WordPress. And I was like, well, I really want to make WordPress a part of my daily life. So I applied to the company Automattic, because they are the company that makes WordPress.com. Their CEO is the co-inventor of WordPress. And I landed a job there as a project manager. Now, Automattic was founded 18 years ago, and they've never had an office. They've been completely distributed since day one. They have 2,000 employees now, scattered around 90 different countries. We work wherever we want, whenever we want. We do get together occasionally in person. Here we are in the Netherlands back in October of 2019. And I am in the back there. That is me. This is the team I was on at the time. We were about 120 of us, all flew in from around the globe to get together. Now, one thing about me, part of my brand, if you know me well, is that I really love dogs. I just go nuts over dogs. And I've always wanted a dog, but I was always so busy with my life, working 9 to 5, doing community theater, going to grad school, whatever at night, I didn't have time to have a dog. But I thought, okay, now I have a job that I can work from home. I can be home 40 hours a week taking care of my dog, taking it for walks on my lunch break, whatever. So this is finally a point in my life where I'm able to do that. So I asked my landlord, I said, hey, I've been a model tenant for the 5 years I've been living in your apartment. It's a 2-story house. Do you let the people on the first floor have a dog? I would like a dog too. And he said, okay. So I spent the next 3 months applying to rescues, doing site visits, background checks, meeting candidates, etc. And then while I was at KansasFest 2019, so 4 years ago, I text him and I say, hey, I found a dog. I'd like to adopt this one. Obviously, I want to do it with your approval, full transparency and communication. Is that okay? And he said, he sent me back a rather troubling text. He said, no, I changed my mind. You can't have a dog, and you should move out. So that was pretty upsetting to have just been in one place for 5 years and be told I'm no longer welcome. And it happened while I was on vacation at KansasFest. The good news is that, this is a problem I've solved before. I've moved a lot. I know how to find an apartment. I know how to pack things up, get them from one place to the other, learn a new environment. So I started doing that. I was looking at apartments online. And then the Friday of KansasFest, a Friday much like this one, that evening we were having the pizza party. After we were done, people had left. I was sticking around to clean up. And I was standing right about where Martin is now. And I was describing the situation to Kay Savitz, who was standing right about where Jay is now, and how I was looking at places in Boston, and it was seeming expensive. And Kay, who lives near Portland, Oregon, said, you can move closer to me in Portland. And that's when I realized I could move to Portland, or Santa Fe, or Chicago, or Nashville, or Tampa, or Los Angeles. I could move anywhere. There was no reason I had to be paying Boston rent, because my job was no longer there. This was my first time moving after getting a fully remote job. And so you might think that my reaction to this realization might have been one of joy and rapture. But in reality, my reaction to that realization that I had in this room on that Friday of KansasFest 2019 was less Bilbo Baggins and more Roy Kent. I was actually really upset by this realization. And I'll get to why, but it was clear. It wasn't just this was going on in my head. I immediately sank into the nearest chair and just put my head in my hands. And somebody else in the room, who was standing about where Ed is in the back, didn't want to disrupt whatever was happening in my head. So they texted me from within the same room and said, are you okay? And I said, I'm considering a big life change. It hit me like an anvil. It's a lot to think about. So here's the problem with that lifestyle. The problem is that I'm an Apple II user. And Apple II users, they like constraints. The Apple II, it has a 1 megahertz CPU, 140K of storage, 64K RAM. And if we really wanted to and needed to, we can expand those. We can make it run at 800 megahertz, and we can throw 16 gigs of RAM at it. But that's really how you solve problems with modern computers. With Apple II computers, we tend not to work around those limitations. We tend to work within them, because constraints breed creativity. We want to see, what can we make it do with 1 megahertz? What can we make it do with 64K of RAM? So we embrace the totality of the platform. We don't go wide, we go deep with the Apple II. And that's kind of how I had lived my life for 40 years. I was born and raised in Massachusetts, and I loved to travel. I traveled extensively. I'd been to 46 of our 50 states. I'd been to 11 countries, 4 continents. But no matter where I went, I always came home to Massachusetts. That's where I lived. And I'd lived there for a long time, 32 years in the same county, 40 years in the same state, never farther than 40 minutes from where I grew up. So just like the Apple II, those were my constraints. And I knew Massachusetts really well. I had a lot of connections there. I was recognized as one of the city's best storytellers. I was on the adjunct faculty of a local college. And I knew if I became a nomad, I'd have to give all that up. But I also knew if I didn't become a nomad, I would regret it. This was a unique moment in my life. No property, no dependents, no job in person. I had to take that chance. So I loaded up my car, the Juiced.GS mobile, little Prius. You might expect it to be a big SUV for this kind of lifestyle, but nope, it's a Prius. Threw a bike rack on the roof. And the first stop I made was not that far away. I just went from central Massachusetts to Syracuse, New York, because that's where Juiced.GS associate editor Andy Malloy lives. And I wanted to spend some time with my good friend Andy. Every December, when I'm putting together the December issue of Juiced.GS, Andy is the associate editor. And he has a hard time contributing to that issue, because every December he is helping organize a vendor, an arts and crafts fair as a fundraiser for his local peace council. And so instead of berating him and saying, you really need to prioritize Juiced.GS, I went to Syracuse and I said, Andy, I really want to see and be a part of this thing that is so important to you that you've been contributing to for decades. I don't want to just attend it. I want to be a part of it. I want to volunteer. So I was actually able to man the merch table at his vendor fair and actually see this thing that he'd been telling me about for so long. And it was great to be a part of his life in that way. From there, I went a little bit down the South Coast to North Carolina, got to hang out with Charles Mangan, David Schmidt, and Mark Pilgrim, 2 of whom have been to KansasFest before. David Schmidt is on the Juiced.GS staff, and I had never met him before. He's been writing for us for years, and I'd never met him. So it was great to finally put a face to the name and hang out with him. And then I headed a little bit west to Ohio. I was on my way to Chicago. I stopped to visit Stavros and his wife, Ashley. Had a great time, just one night layover, went out for dinner. On the way out of the house, though, I forgot my scale, my bathroom scale, at their house. Didn't realize it until I was already halfway to Chicago. And I said, don't worry about it. You know, Stavros, it's March. I'll see you in 4 months at KansasFest. I'll get it back then. That was March 7th of 2020. I had an itinerary for the rest of the year, and it went up in flames. 8 of my next 11 stops all got canceled because of this little thing called the pandemic. I was not anticipating that when I started this lifestyle 5 months earlier. The pandemic is not a time when you want to be around a lot of people. But I'm an extrovert. I like being around people. So I was like, how am I going to balance these two things? Well, again, back to the reason I was Nomad in the first place. I moved to the desert of Arizona, and I spent the whole first summer of the pandemic fostering dogs. It was great. They all got adopted eventually. From there, I went all the way to the West Coast, to Oregon. Got to hang out with my friend Peter Neubauer, where I went kayaking in Bend, Oregon. Also in Bend, I hung out with another K-Fest alumni, Marcus Adams, where we went snowshoeing, and he made me a shirt, Juiced.GS, and I gave him the magazine, Juiced.GS. And then I went to hang out with the person who got me on this road in the first place, Kay Savitz, and gave them Juiced.GS as well. And that's when I started having an idea. In my travels to Portland, I passed through Montana. And there was this really small town that I never would have recognized, except I'd seen it before on the mailing label of a Juiced.GS envelope. I have a subscriber in this town. And I thought I should stop in and say hello. But then I thought, well, a stranger knocking on your door unannounced is generally not welcome, especially during a pandemic, in the first few months of the pandemic. And I was like, I'll send him a postcard, and that's what I did. But then I had another opportunity to do something similar a few months later, in December. When I was visiting Kay in Portland, I made a day trip up to Seattle. And there are a lot of Juiced.GS subscribers in Seattle, including one along the way. And I thought, okay, this is kind of the same thing. Strangers showing up unannounced during a pandemic, but now I have something to give him, the latest issue of Juiced.GS, because it had just come out that week. So I'm going to deliver Juiced.GS to him. I'm going to be a personal delivery man for Juiced.GS. So I drive up to Seattle. I knock on this guy's door. He opens the door. I'm holding the magazine. I say, hi, I'm Ken Gagne, the editor and publisher of Juiced.GS. And he says, congratulations. It's like, oh, okay, you're okay. I gave him the magazine. He was like, okay. He went inside. I was like, okay, this is still a flawed formula. I haven't gotten this down yet. The problem is not necessarily that I'm showing up or that it's a pandemic or that I'm delivering Juiced.GS. The problem is that I'm doing it unannounced. So a few months later, for the March issue, I was in San Francisco. A lot of Juiced.GS subscribers in the Bay Area, Silicon Valley. So I created a form online. I emailed all my Bay Area subscribers, and I said, if you would like to opt in to personal delivery of Juiced.GS, fill out this form. I will show up on a time that I give you on this Saturday. We will interact only outdoors and only masked, because there were no vaccines yet. And I will give you Juiced.GS. And 8 people signed up. So I plotted a route. It was hundreds of miles, took about 6 hours of driving. And I went to each person one by one and gave them Juiced.GS. Now, some of those individuals, they just took the magazine, said thanks, posed for a quick selfie, and went inside. That's cool. A couple of people had actually set out chairs and a pitcher of lemonade outside, and we got to hang out outside. There is Forrest Lowe, who's here at KansasFest. And we chatted for like an hour. It was great, talking all about beta testing Nox Archaeist. Out of the 8 people I met, only 2 I had met before at KansasFest. The other 6 were completely new. And the reception was, it was awesome to get to meet these people, and I think they enjoyed it too. There was one person who I knocked on the door, he opened the door, and I said, hi, I'm Ken Gagne of Juiced.GS, and I have the latest issue here for you. And before he said or did anything, he looked over his shoulder and said, honey, kids, it's Ken Gagne. And they all came outside, and we stood about 6 feet apart talking for over an hour. Because even on a good day, it's rare that you have an opportunity to talk to somebody else in person about the Apple II. And you add in a pandemic on top of that, and you got a lot of pent-up nerdness that you got to get out. And I was that outlet, and I was thrilled to do so. So I also do a video called 1 Second Every Day. I record 1 second of video every day, and at the end of the year, I have a 7-minute video that encapsulates the entire year. I recorded a bunch of seconds that day, and I made a little montage where apparently there's no sound, and we had just all said, Apple II. And so that they all made it into my 1 second compilation. Another cool interaction that happened while I was in the Bay Area was in the form of museums. In Oakland, across the bridge from Alameda, where I was staying, looking for the nuclear vessels, is the Museum of Art and Digital Entertainment, or the MADE, M-A-D-E. I backed their Kickstarter to launch like 10 years ago. I'm one of their Patreon backers. One day they said, we're having an open house drop-off. If you have anything you want to donate to the MADE, just come on by and we'll take it. I was like, great. So I went on by with some issues of Juiced.GS. I've been mailing them stuff for years, video game stuff. But I was like, here's an opportunity to introduce myself in person and give them Juiced.GS. And it was great to meet them in person. That's Alex Handy, the founder of the MADE. And now they have a complete collection of Juiced.GS. I thought, oh, this is a great opportunity as I'm traveling to look for other opportunities to do this. So a few years ago, 5 years ago, KSavitz organized a tour for us at KFest to go to the Linda Hall Library of Science and Technology within walking distance of here. We went to a Apollo moon landing trivia night, which was pretty cool. And so I emailed them. I was like, hey, I was there for your tour 5 years ago, and would you be interested in accepting a collection of GS to your archives? And they said, we'd love that. So after KFest last year, I spent the entire month of August in Kansas City. I stayed here after you all went home. And I brought over a complete collection of Juiced.GS, and now that's in their archives as well. But my favorite incident like that was at the American Computer and Robotics Museum in Bozeman, Montana, the country's oldest computer museum. I'd never been there, and I was there with 2 friends, and we were doing the tour. I got to see some great computers. There's an Apple II right there. And the museum is closing time, so we're leaving, which of course makes you go through the gift shop. And I saw the book Cult of Mac, which I'd never seen in person before. We'd reviewed it in Juiced.GS, but I'd never seen it or read it myself. So I picked it up and I was flipping through it, and I went to the index. This is a book about the Macintosh, but I was curious, do they say anything about KansasFest in this book? So I flipped to the index, go to K, it says like, go to page 173. I was like, cool. And sure enough, there's a page all about KansasFest. There's Kate, there's Peter Neubauer, Henry Corbis. That's the garage giveaway. Pretty cool. So that's on one page of the book. And what shocks me to see on the other page is Juiced.GS. And there's a whole write-up about it. And under it, it says, edited and published by Ken Gagne, a teacher at Emerson College in Massachusetts. And right there in the middle of the gift shop, I say, holy crap, that's me! Except with more vulgar language. And the docent who had been giving us the tour, he says, what? I said, that's me here in this book. Look out the window. See the Prius with the license plate Juiced? That's me. And he says, holy crap, that's you. I was like, I know, that's what I'm saying. So he took a picture of me with that book standing in front of an Apple I signed by Steve Wozniak. And I said, you know, I didn't come here with my magazine, but I'm going to be passing through Bozeman again in a month. If you'd like, I can drop off a complete collection of every issue of Juiced.GS for your archives. And they said, that'd be wonderful. So a month later, I went back and personally delivered the latest issue of Juiced.GS with a floppy disk and all the issues that had ever come before that. And now that's in their collection, which I was not expecting when I opened up the Cult of Mac book in their gift shop. So museums are a place where you go to see things that don't really exist in nature anymore. You know, they're sort of dead to the world. Which also describes some of the Apple II users I went to see on my trip. So Joe Cohn, for example, was a KansasFest attendee. He was a writer for Insider A+. He wrote about shareware programs for the Apple II. And when Insider A+ folded, he took his column, writing for them, called Shareware Solutions, and he made his own magazine, Shareware Solutions 2, which he published from 1993 to 1999. Before Juiced.GS ever existed, he was publishing shareware solutions 2. He was here at several of my first KFest. I got to buy shareware solutions 2 right from him in person. And sadly, he passed away in 2010 from cancer. When I was in the Bay Area distributing Juiced.GS to subscribers, Ewan Wanup, who's been to KansasFest and is the author of Spectrum, he's on the Juiced.GS staff, and he said, Ken, you know, you're right across the bridge from Marin County where Joe used to live. It's like, oh, you're right. So I went up to Marin County on a day off from work, and I went to the cemetery office, and I asked them, can you help me find my friend Joe? Here's his name, his birthday, and when he passed away. And they pulled out a map, they told me where to go, and after some wandering around, I was able to find his gravestone. Now, I'm not somebody who generally goes to cemeteries, because for me, the person isn't there. But on the other hand, this was the closest I'd been to Joe in 13 years. He was a huge influence on me when I became an Apple II user, like in the early to mid-90s on CompuServe and Genie. And I got to, as I mentioned, hang out with him at KansasFest a long time ago. He hadn't been to KFest in a while. And I ended up just sitting there for like an hour, just talking to him. And it really meant a lot to have that experience that I didn't even know I needed. That was 2 years ago. This year, I had some time off from work. I'm trying to get to all 50 states in my life. I had never been to Hawaii or Alaska, so I went to Hawaii for a week. I spent an entire week on Maui, and then I had 1 day on Oahu, the island that Honolulu's on. And how did I want to spend that 1 day? I decided to go hiking. There is a trail called the Olamaua Trail. It goes among 3 peaks, and then you have to hike back. And if you want to do the whole thing, it takes an entire day. When you reach the trailhead, where the trail begins, there's a sign warning you that 6 people have passed away on this trail in the last 12 years. And it starts with the most recent, which is less than a year ago, and it goes back to the first one in 2011. And that first person who passed away in 2011 was Ryan Suinaga, who we had the donut night for last night. He was a member of the Apple II community. He was a software developer. He was the editor of Juiced.GS. He was on the KansasFest planning committee. He was the host of the A2 Unplugged podcast. And he was my friend. More than once, on his way from Hawaii to Kansas City, he would stop in Boston, Massachusetts to visit me. Not exactly at work. And we got to hang out. He could be a real pain in the ass, to be honest, but he was also a good friend and very loyal. And I wanted to experience where he had spent his last day. The Olamaua Trail, as I mentioned, 6 people have passed away. All 6 fatalities happened after the first peak. I only hiked as far as the first peak before turning around. So I was in what you might consider a safe zone. Nonetheless, it was a little nerve-wracking. And although I have done a lot of hiking in my life, Yellowstone, Yosemite, etc., I'd never seen a trail like this. This was challenging. There were vertical climbs where there were ropes that were positioned into the mountain to pull yourself up because there was no way you were getting up without them. I'd never been on a trail like that. And it was just as challenging coming down as well. The thing is, though, that I started that trail completely alone. I was traveling by myself. The digital nomad lifestyle lends itself to a lot of solitary experiences. And when I stepped foot on that trail, I was by myself, just like Ryan was when he passed away. But by the time I had gotten back to the trailhead at the end of my hike, I had accumulated a gaggle of hikers who were all with me. And they all knew what I was going through that day. And they were all there to support me. And some of them went home and donated in Ryan's memory. And so I was not alone. I was never alone. As a member of the Apple II community, I never am. Which brings me back to why I've been doing this lifestyle and what it's meant to me. I started by saying that the Apple II, growing up as a user of it, made it really hard for me to engage in this lifestyle. But that's not all it's done for me. I've gotten to see a lot of Apple II users in my travels, from Alabama to Nebraska to Chicago, to Colorado, to Texas, to Australia. And in all of these people that I've met, some who I'd seen before, some who I hadn't seen in 20 years, and some whom I'd never met, there's something I've realized about the Apple II community. Something that we're really good at and which we actively strive for. And whether it's represented in something like the Ethernet card, the retro connector keyboard adapter, or KansasFest itself, two things we are really good at is adaptation and connection. So what I've been trying to do as an Apple II user traveling the world is make every single day count. Because you don't know where your friends are until you get to see them again. You don't know when that opportunity will present itself unless you seek it out. And life isn't always waiting for you in the same place every day. So if you would like to follow my travels and see a complete itinerary of where I've been and where I'm going, you can find me on the web at roadbits.net. That's my travel blog. And from here, I'm going to be, in a couple of hours, getting in my car and driving to Covington, Kentucky, where I will spend the next month right across the river from Cincinnati. Then I'm going to go off to Washington, D.C. for 4 days to attend WordCamp US, down to Atlanta for 2 weeks to go to Dragon Con with John Leake, who is attending KansasFest this year. Back up to Western Massachusetts to spend time with my brother and his family for 2 months. Off to Spain for a week for work. And then down to Connecticut to spend Thanksgiving and Christmas with my cousin, who I would like to get to know better because she's on my dad's side of the family, and ever since my dad passed, I try to treasure those connections. And then off to Dog City in Massachusetts, Cat City in Vermont, and after that, who knows? But I know that wherever I go along the way, there will be Apple II users. So thank you. Any questions?
You mentioned that you visited 46 of the 50 states so far, or 34 you haven't yet.
The question is, what states have I not been to? So at the time that I began nomading, I had not been to, I think, 46 or 4. I had been to 46 or 47 of them. Let's see. I think it was 47, actually, even though the slide said 46. So I went to West Virginia in February of 2020, and that was my first time in West Virginia, and that was the last continental state I hadn't been to. So at that point, I'd now been to 48. That just left Alaska and Hawaii. This year, I went to Hawaii for the first time. That leaves Alaska. I did receive an invitation 3 years ago to do some dog sitting in Alaska, and they were going to fly me up there for the occasion. But it was Nome in December. So not only did that seem extremely unpleasant, but I also need to have a reliable internet connection to do my job. Otherwise, I'll be unemployed, and that threatens my very lifestyle. So I declined that opportunity, and I look forward to visiting Juneau or Anchorage at a later time. So, any other questions? Yes?
So with your Prius, where do you put all of your stuff? And do you leave your bike kind of up top? How do you manage it logistically?
Yeah, where do I put all my stuff when all I have is a Prius? So that's a good question. So the lifestyle of the Nomad does not lend itself to accumulating stuff. When I started my travels, I put into my car everything I thought I would need. One of the reasons I only went as far as Syracuse is because I was going back to Massachusetts a few months later for New Year's. And I knew that was an opportunity for me to visit my storage unit and change my loadout. Be like, okay, I thought I needed this, I don't, and I do need this, so I'm gonna grab that. The first few months I was ordering stuff from Amazon all the time. Now I have not ordered anything from Amazon in over 2 years because where would I put it? So with the Prius, I have the bike on the roof. That model Prius does not support a bike rack on the trunk, so it has to go on the roof. The front seat, the passenger seat, has my 27-inch monitor, because since I do work at a computer, I don't want to be hunched over a laptop. So there's that and my backpack. And then the seat well goes all my coats and shoes. In the back seat, in the seat wells, goes a lot of cookware, because I do a lot of cooking, and a lot of Airbnbs are not well equipped. So I have my food and my kitchenware in the seat wells of the back. And then I have plastic bins that go over them with all my electronics, any books or stamps or envelopes that I need, a bunch of issues of Juiced.GS so I can fulfill orders, a little cooler with some food in it. In the trunk go 2 suitcases. And yeah, when I travel, actually I spent 6 weeks in Europe this winter, 1 in Barcelona, 5 in Budapest, all with just 1 carry-on luggage and a backpack. And then when I spent 34 days going to Hawaii, Australia, and New Zealand, which was 8 flights, 14 accommodations, and 3 ferries, same thing, 1 carry-on, 1 backpack. So I have a lot of stuff in my car. Like I have 1 tote that's just spices, because I love to go cooking. You don't want to buy those again every time you move. I don't need that to go to Hawaii. I'm not going to do a lot of cooking, or if I am, it's not going to be very flavorful, but I can get by. Same with my bicycle. I don't take that with me. So I have, there are people who just backpack through Europe, and yay for them. I have a crock pot. So there are all different layers and levels at which you can go nomading. And I choose to have a lot of stuff, but not so much that it doesn't fit in my Prius. And I've never needed a larger vehicle. There was one time where I actually needed to fit a passenger in my car with all my stuff. And I made it work without the other person being uncomfortable. But it was challenging. The good news is that it's kind of like playing Tetris, except you have the same pieces every time. So when I load up my car today to head to my next stop, I know exactly where everything goes. And if I'm 3 hours down the highway and I need to grab something, without even taking my eyes off the wheel, I can just reach back and grab it because I know exactly where it is. So, any other questions? If you're wondering how Juiced.GS gets published, brief story. When I lived in Massachusetts, I had a print shop that was a half an hour away. And what I would do is I would go to him, pick up the envelopes onto which he had pre-printed all the mailing labels and return. And I would manually put stamps on every one. And then I'd go back to him a week later, pick up the magazine, go to my friends Tom and Kristen's house with some pizza, and we'd have a mailing party of just stuffing the envelopes. And then the next day I bring them to the post office. Done. Now that I'm a nomad, I am not in Massachusetts. Still love that print shop and still use them. They've been our printer for over a decade. So what I'd have them do is I'd have them mail the envelopes to me, and I'd put all the stamps on them. And then a week later, they would mail the issue to me, and I'd stuff them. 3 downsides to that. 1, paper is heavy, and mailing it to me costs about $300. 2, it means that between when I was done preparing the issue and by the time I was able to put it in the envelope, there was a week in which it was traveling across the country to get to me. And 3, I don't necessarily have people around me anymore who can help me stuff. And Juiced.GS has more subscribers every year than it did the previous year. So it wasn't scaling for just me to do it. So after not being back in Massachusetts for 2 years due to the pandemic, I finally got back to the print shop and I said, hey, I love the work you do. I'm going to keep working with you. But the process we have right now isn't scaling. So what can we do to improve that? And he said, well, Ken, instead of spending $300 to UPS for me to ship the stuff to you, why don't you just pay me $300 and I'll put all the stamps on the envelopes and put the magazine in the envelope and mail it for you. I was like, great. So that solved the problem. So now I just send him a PDF. I go to the USPS.com and have stamps sent to him. I go to Office Depot and have envelopes sent to him, and he puts all 3 together. The downside is we prioritize our paying subscribers. So you all get your issues in the mail, and then like a week or 2 later, I get a stack of like 30 issues in the mail for me to fulfill one-off orders. But that means like, I'm getting emails from all of you saying, hey, the issue looks great. And I'm like, if you say so, because I haven't seen it yet. So I used to be the first person to see the issue. Now I'm the last. But the end result's the same.
Well, you were a paid subscriber, you people go through it.
It's true, I'm not a paid subscriber. I was actually going through my parents' basement recently. I found all the issues of Juiced.GS from when I was a paying subscriber. It's like, oh, those were simpler times. Anyway, any last questions?
Sure. Just for people who are not reading the answers in Discord, somebody asked, how am I able to work internationally? The answer is my company allows me to be out of the country for up to 90 days, after which they would have to transition me from employee to contractor status, which would have implications for my healthcare and other benefits. But within 90 days, I can travel internationally. I spent 5 weeks working from Budapest in Hungary this past winter. I roughly had to work East Coast hours of the United States. So that was 2 to 10 p.m. locally in Budapest. But yeah, it was a lot of fun to be able to be outside the country for such an extended period, which I've never done before. Any other, that was, I think, the only question in the chat. Are there any other new questions? Somebody did ask me if I had found the nuclear vessels in Alameda, and I did. And I actually wrote a whole blog post about it. I found the specific street corners that were used to shoot those scenes in Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home. And I was actually able to recreate some of the scenes with a friend of mine. So that was a lot of fun. Yeah, I actually, so since I do have a Prius, which is a relatively small car, I don't travel with Apple II hardware, unfortunately. I rely on emulation on my MacBook. So I don't get a lot of hands-on time with the Apple II, but I do have a lot of time with Apple II users, more than I ever did before, to be honest. It used to be the only time I'd see Apple II users was at KansasFest, and now I see them year round. I've never slept in my car, to answer Darren Crawford's question. I should have been more explicit about my accommodations in the presentation. I use long-term Airbnbs. A lot of them give monthly discounts up to 80% if you stay at least 28 nights. And I also use a website called Trusted House Sitters, which I use to find long-term pet sitting. I spent 6 weeks last winter dog sitting in Golden, Colorado, taking care of 2 10-year-old pit bulls in their own home, which was a lot less stress for them than being boarded or kenneled. So if anybody wants a referral link for a discount off that site, I can drop that in the Discord. Any visa requirements? I don't tell people that, like, when I go through customs, I just say, I'm here for pleasure, here for fun. I don't say I'm there for business. There are a lot of countries that offer digital nomad visas, but that is usually for people, in my experience, who are self-employed. And I have an employer. I have a full-time job. They have entities at countries throughout the world, such as Ireland, for example. So I could go be an Irish employee of them if I wanted to move to that country. Do I have a fixed address for tax purposes? Yes, legally, I live with my mother. I have not actually lived with my parents for about 30 years, but when I left my old apartment with the landlord who was unkind to me, I put all my stuff into a storage unit and I changed my driver's license to my mother's address with her permission. So I vote in Massachusetts, I pay taxes in Massachusetts, I get all my mail in Massachusetts, and once a month, my brother, who lives near my mother, packages all my mail and just sends it to wherever I am. I just give him an address. There are a lot of companies in South Dakota that will do that for you, because to become a resident of South Dakota requires only 1 night stay. So you stay at the hotel, bring your receipt to the town clerk, boom, you're a resident. They have some of the lowest state income taxes in the country, no annual vehicle inspection fee. So it's a really good deal. And one of the reasons I didn't do that is because I'd have to give up my vanity plate in Massachusetts, and the plate Juiced is not available in South Dakota. So that just wasn't worth it for me. What do I miss most about the brick and mortar lifestyle? Not much, to be honest. This is actually much more affordable. I'm saving a lot of money living this way. So I'm, some people say they need to save up money so that they can travel someday. I'm doing both, which is pretty awesome. So I really enjoy that. Landlord sounds like yes, he is a jerk. Let's see. I think that's, do I have any? I think that's most of the questions. I'm reading both the Discord and the Zoom chat. If I ever come down to Brazil, I need to hit somebody up, I will do that. I haven't been to South America in a while. I did go to Peru with some KansasFest alumni 11 years ago, had a great time. And I think I'm almost out of time, so I'll just say the cliffhanger that I forgot to resolve in my presentation at Kansas City last week, in which nobody has asked about, either in Kansas City or in chat, is I did get my scale back. Stavros brought it to me at KansasFest last year, 2.5 years later, after I forgot it, once we were finally able to see each other again in a pandemic. So I now know how much I weigh.
I very much approve of the comment in there that it was weighing on their mind.
Good. And that comment comes from the person I was saying, who, when I arrived at his door, he looked over his shoulder and said, "Honey, kids, it's Ken Gagne." And then we spent an hour standing outside 6 feet apart chatting. So Huxley, always good to see you.
No, I think we're done. All right. Thank you very much.